Hello there, Sword Friends. Today I have an off-topic rambly video for you, and that is specifically around one point, and that is what makes a mass production, a modern sword, objectively bad at being a sword. And so I want to stick to the specifics of that. Historically speaking, I'm not really qualified to speak on why one sword from a historical period that was made in that period is good or bad. But in terms of the modern-made swords that are on the market, there are some various designs out there that I think are objectively bad at being swords. And again, specifically that, I want to preface that it's objectively bad at being a sword. Not that they are inherently bad, that they're not worth your money, that the blah 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 is bad, or that the steel's bad, the company's bad, the guy that's made it's bad, or any of that kind of stuff. Just what design-wise makes these particular objects objectively bad at being a sword. And so as I think about that, I do have to preface that again with a modern design, people are taking some artistic liberties and this and that. They're being used in a modern context. Again, it doesn't mean that they aren't collectible or fun, just that they're not great at being swords. So to me, when I think of a sword, I think of it as things that it's not. It's not a shield. It's not an axe. They need to be nimble enough to do their intended purpose. It doesn't mean they have to be obscenely sharp or obscenely durable or obscenely agile, but they do have to kind of do what they're supposed to do, I guess. If they're designed to be obscenely sharp to do tamashigiri, they don't have to be the most agile, but they better be sharp, they better hold an edge well. That's kind of the design and intended purpose. If it's a two-handed sword that's kind of meant to do some defensive capabilities, then I don't expect obscene sharpness, but durability is probably going to be favored. I expect some weight, but I also expect it to be not so overbuilt that it's cumbersome to move around. I expect the swords to handle like a sword, to index well, to not bite me in my hands and things like that, or have things that would harm me, and also to be a sword, to be functional as a weapon in the intended purpose. So at least that's maybe a 10,000 foot view of some of the things that I expect from a sword. So now I have a couple examples here, and I will try to discuss what I think they're objectively bad. Please let me know if you disagree. I think it's a fascinating conversation about kind of where the hard lines are, what we all think is bad in the market, and I'm certainly willing to admit if I'm wrong on anything here. Also, this is not a complete list of everything. There's no way I'd hit it all, but I do have some examples, some things that I can talk about, and hopefully it makes for interesting conversation. Okay, so the first one to talk about is perhaps this guy here, the Flying Dragon. Why is that? Well, there's a lot wrong with the design of this sword, and it touches on actually a lot of points. I think this one maybe hits all of the things. One, this is a stainless steel wall hanger, sword-like object, an SLO as sometimes we refer to them. It is not, it's intended to be a decoration. So, but it's also intended to be a sword, the sword-like decoration. Now, I don't think this is intended for use, but a lot of people buy these. You see people online all the time buying swords made of this material without any more durability than you see here, and then actually using them, and that can be dangerous for a variety of different reasons, because they're, I don't believe, intended to be used. So one, stainless steel, that's what this blade is made out of. Generally speaking, it tends to be brittle, but honestly, there's all sorts of different types of steels and ways to temper it, and so I've also seen these quite successfully cut and not break and snap, and I've also seen them kind of bend and twist and not be as brittle as I've been led to believe they are. That said, I know it's not intended to use, so I don't tend to do it. I also kind of know the tang isn't constructed in such a way that it's going to be meant to hold up to much punishment here. But so one, kind of fails at point one of just generally being a sword. Can't hold it against it too much because I doubt that was the intention. But there's other design flaws here. One, you can kind of notice where my thumb is. Maybe it's just my big giant dumb sausage hands, but if I choke up on the grip here, there is a claw sticking into my knuckle, and it bites me right into the flub of my hand. So if I were to impact anything and it were to lurch back, it would just kind of bite into my hands. It seems like poor design. I suppose you could hold it down here, but if you want to get two hands on, then you have kind of instantly some discomfort happening from the design. It's kind of made to harm the user. Maybe if I cut this way. Anyway, I'm not sure exactly. It's obviously meant to look cool rather than functional, but anyway. Bitey McOuch right here on the hands. Other bits, it's got a round grip, so it does have some kind of ribbing to it, so to speak. Cock of the dragon, so as it were. But it's round, and it's very tough for me to tell if I close my eyes where the edge is on this sword. It's wavy and weird and off balance. There's no inherent point that I could tell you with my eyes closed that it's meant to be, you know, choppy chop this way. So round handles in swords, not great. It's not necessarily ahistoric or impossible to do, but it does make it challenging to figure out where the edge is, and that's something, generally speaking, you want to know with a sword. Those are the kind of the three main things. One, it's not a sword intended for use. Two, it bites my hand, and three, it's round. I suppose there's other things now, fantasy-wise. If this sword were functional, I guess I don't know how well this would work. It has a large, pronounced secondary bevel. Maybe it'd be fine. It's short, and weight-wise, it's pretty hefty for the size that it is. There's a lot of excess material here, but I digress. I will just stop talking about how bad this one is, because obviously it's not great. I'm going to move on to another one, and that is this guy right here, and I'm going to see if I can not knock on things so that you can kind of hear it. What you don't see, perhaps by the video here, is how obscenely heavy this thing is. It's very thick. It has no real elements of taper. It's likely, I believe, sold as a Renaissance fair type thing from a craftsman at Renfest. I'm not 100% sure who made it, honestly, but it's obviously a fantasy type inspired design. I venture I guess it wasn't ever terribly expensive, but it has a couple faux pas as it is in terms of swords. So one, round handle, and with how heavy this is, I mean, I can kind of feel where the edge is, but it's tough, and round handles are generally speaking a no-no for the index factor. And when it's really heavy like this, yeah, I mean, you can kind of feel, I suppose, by the pommel where the crossguard is. So if you hold it thusly, you might be able to index it, but you don't necessarily know by holding the actual grip itself. And to the weight, this is more of an axe-like object. It's a strain to hold in your hand in general. It is a big, heavy object. So as an object of art, or something to wear in your garb at a Renfest, it maybe suits the purpose intended just fine. But as a sword, I don't think I would be particularly agile in using this defensively. Offensively, I would have a lot of trouble reaching my target. And for the size it is and the weight it is, I mean, it's difficult to say in what sword-related context this would be useful. So as an art object, sure, but as a sword, the weight, the shape of the sword, the grip, all of these things, I think objectively just make it a bad sword. Now, a number of you have probably been eyeballing this on the table as it's been sitting here. This is the Conan the Barbarian sword from Albion, and it is, you know, it's funny that many of the other swords that I have on my table are hundreds of dollars, and I'm calling them bad swords. And here's one that I believe is objectively a bad sword. Perhaps it's not for Conan, a fictional character, right? But for a human, I think this has all of the elements of bad sword, and I will attempt to elaborate. So, one, size. Other people have talked about this. This is not a particularly long sword, but it is like 7.5 pounds, close to 8 pounds in terms of weight. You can find kind of the specs on Albion. And while it is cool and inspirational and awesome as a sword, I have no regrets about owning it, especially even considering the thousands of dollars in terms of price point. I won't deny that it's just a terrible sword. It's short. This one is not particularly sharp. It has kind of odd ricasso section, which isn't useful. It has a relatively nubby crossguard that doesn't offer much in the way of protection. It has a grip that is one round, for the most part. I say it's slightly elliptical, but it is actually mostly round, so it doesn't help you index the blade at all. It has a grip that is short, and it's tough to get two hands on the grip itself, so it's like a two-handed sword, but with a, I don't know, weird kind of grip, and the pommel is not particularly conducive to holding. Even with my giant sausage hands, it's not comfortable. It's got an obscene weight, a round handle, you know, a goofy grip that isn't conducive to using it with one hand or two. But beyond that, the dynamics of the sword are funny. The way the sword vibrates, when you hit anything with it, it wants to shake out of your hand. It has a lot of vibration to it, and it basically wants to break your guard. And you can see maybe how much my hand is shaking as I'm kind of holding it in the grip. I feel it vibrate all the way up my shoulder. So if I actually struck anything with it, it would be very uncomfortable to keep to keep in hand. So I think all of those things combined, it's not particularly agile. Again, I'm no Conan the Barbarian, but I think all of those things make this an objectively bad sword. The next ones are odd, somewhat newer bits that I've added to collection here. But they strike me as objectively bad in a few ways. One, things we've talked about, round grips. I can kind of feel index-wise where it is, but this antler horn rubs into the flub of my hand in a way that I would describe as uncomfortable. I can feel ledges and sharp kind of bits on this on the grip, and this little knuckle piece right here rubs in my hand is in also kind of an uncomfortable way. If I choke up on the grip, I have this little thorn stabbing me, kind of punishing me for holding the sword. The previous owner also noted that this one does not appear to be heat treated particularly well and is soft. As it is, I mean, I can move the sword around, but these little claw bits want to get, you know, depending on how I hold the thing, the pommel wants to hook onto me, and and the crossguard wants to bite me. So in terms of design, well, it might be aesthetically pleasing, depending on your tastes. There are elements here that make this relatively uncomfortable as a user and not terribly reassuring in terms of durability. So, you know, in terms of sword-wise, objectively, I would say, you know, well, it bears further testing. Just at first grip, it feels uncomfortable and like it wants to break in my hand. Here's another one from the same manufacturer. Now, to me, this is a better design. Nothing inherently is as aggressive to my hand as the previous, but I can say that the owner had cut with this before and the handle shattered. So again, kind of a deal breaker, objectively a bad sword if you're using it to actually do sword-related activities and it breaks. This is a stout, meaty little chopper, and as it is, the design is functional, albeit, you know, maybe cumbersome to move around, but having the handle shatter apart when using is not generally well, I think we might all be able to agree objectively makes it bad at doing sword-related activities. The scabbard is oddly long, though I think this sword may have been cut down, so I won't hold it against it. Maybe there's some usefulness to having a very long scabbard and a relatively short sword. The next sword I have is one from Dark Sword Armory, and in itself, the sword, it's not bad. Dynamically, it moves around. It's a relatively fun looking and feeling sword, but the part that gets me in terms of being bad is this pommel right here. So we can see that there's these hooks and they jut. They're not, you know, inherently sharp and pointy by themselves, but they jut right into the flesh of your hand, and they are very uncomfortable. And if I hit anything with my hand kind of down on the pommel, or if I was gripping it, I'm not overly doubtful that this would hurt me significantly. You can also see that one of the little kind of nubbins on the top here has broken off and now presents some sharp ledges that really would cut into my hand. So if I just cut those off and kind of sanded it down, it might lack some of the elegance and shapeliness that it has right now. But it would also turn it into an otherwise, you know, functional sword. The biting the user side of it is certainly one thing that makes it objectively bad. Here we have a mostly kind of rounded handle, but right up towards the crossguard, I can clearly index the sword. It's not round. The main thing about this that I think it just right away says, hey, deal breaker to me, is this. I tend to grip the pommel or ride my hand down towards the bottom. And I suppose you'd see that when you bought this sword, that this appears sharp, but yeah, this objectively to me seems like it makes it a bad sword and bad at doing sword-related activities. The next one is a Badger Blades sword, and this guy right here is it doesn't have many of the characteristics that the other swords do. It's just basically not a great sword. Objectively, I would say it is a bad sword. You can index it. It doesn't have a completely round handle. It doesn't have any pommel that bites me. Some of these ledges, you know, perhaps might get into the fat of your hand, but they're not overtly trying to harm you like some of the other handles that we've seen so far. The blade, though, is just clumsy. And so as I think about what this sword is supposed to do, well, I suppose as a Renaissance festival type object, it's not really supposed to do much of anything other than survive some pretty abusive stuff. And I think that's what it's built to do, and likely that's the goal that it achieves. But as a sword, it's neither nimble, it's favoring durability, but it doesn't have the things that you would expect in a sword that this is trying to emulate. It doesn't have, it's not particularly sharp, it's not particularly nimble, it's very cumbersome for its size, and it wobbles in kind of odd, uncomfortable ways in the way it shakes your hand. So while it's not aggressive or breaking any of the aforementioned rules, just dynamically speaking, it is a failure as a sword. It was superior in terms of durability in a stage combat type sense, or maybe in looking like a sword and surviving non-sword related activities. But again, kind of the idea here behind this question is what objectively makes a sword bad, and I would argue objectively this is not a good sword. Objectively, it is a bad sword. All right, so that's all I've got. I'm sure the Conan sword is going to draw the most ire from people. A lot of people really like this sword, and believe me, I am included in those people. I really like this sword. It's a fantastic, cool object, but it is not a good sword, and at least that's my contention. Anyway, that's all I've got for this video. Let me know what you think in the commentary down below. Am I off in any of these things? Would you argue that any of these are a good sword, or did you think I missed anything fundamental that would make or disqualify any of these swords as well? Anyway, that's all I've got for you. As always, cheers and thanks for watching.